One thing that I did that we don't need to do in reality is I did make sure that every single conference has a changed name. I don't know if that's important or not important, but I feel like it since all of the conferences do, like, the numbers add up to dissolve all of the conferences and put them into these new conferences, like what was known as the American Athletic is now the Great Plains. You just rebrand, take care of like moving headquarters, or just sell and create new, and the numbers add up and it takes care of everything. But I changed the names of all of them. We start with the Pacific Coast Conference,
which is not really different though. I think it's still the Pacific Coast
because
the Pac-12 is.
And the Pac-12 did a great job of expanding moderately and smartly from the Pac-10 in the first college football realignment. Yeah. They added 2 schools that make sense geographically from a recruiting and television viewership standpoint, because you add new states in Colorado's point. So they did a good job, and now we just add to that with 2 more teams, and
adding more states.
Exactly. Well, 1 more state.
Yeah, I guess BYU is.
Because BYU, the thing about BYU is there was a survey in Salt Lake Tribune that said that the majority of BYU fans think it's beneficial for the team to join a power conference. And so here's where they get the chance to do that, which maybe they should have done in the first point, but maybe they can still do now, because BYU is one of the teams that I thought the Big 12 should go after when I was like, oh my God, Iowa State needs a conference. I'm panicking because I don't know if Texas and Oklahoma are leaving in 2 years. I thought it was like BYU, Louisville, Houston. Those are the teams that you should add. BYU is going to be good to whoever gets them because they have a national fan base. They do the same way that Notre Dame does. They command a branch of Christianity, which they really do. From a collegiate standpoint, this is where the people of that state and of that religion, a lot of them go here for that reason, and they have that following of Catholic people all over the country. Their favorite team is Notre Dame, whether they went there or not. And so BYU does feel that bump because as a private school, they don't have to report how much their athletic revenue is, but it's probably over $50 million a year. And that works. That works for everybody.
Mormonism is huge. That's like the Mormon state of America.
Yeah, if you've watched Abducted in Plain Sight, you can see how people in the Mormon state live.
I watched one part of that, and
it couldn't happen in the technological era that we're in now.
I watched enough of it where I was like, I don't need to watch it.
It gets worse.
It's terrible. I cannot believe it happened.
I'm not going to say anything on this podcast, but last thing is when the father makes his confession.
Oh my!
I saw that.
And just his face when he explains in the phrase that he uses.
Relief. Oh my God,
that poor guy.
Dude,
he's gonna be a meme. Like, what's his name from Firefest was a meme.
At that point of this movie, I was like, you know what? I'm gonna go to bed.
I was late. Good night.
It was after an overnight shift at work. It was super early in the morning. I watched a little bit of it, and I'm like, I'm gonna go to sleep.
I want to apologize to BYU for making that connection. Here on this podcast. Back to BYU and the Utah Utes and the great state of Utah, beautiful state of Utah, and the wonderful people that live in it, from Salt Lake to Provo and everywhere in between. The Pacific Coast would be able to just add 2 teams, BYU, and the other really logical one that has competed at a high collegiate level, brings in athletic revenue, has a national brand, is Boise State. Why didn't they get Boise State earlier?
Yeah, I don't know. The whole Boise State's been a very good football team for a long time.
But the reoccurring thing is, are they as good as they can be because of the conference that they played in, right? But then I think their bowl game with Oklahoma really showed that they could run with the big dogs.
Yeah, definitely.
They did a great job of recruiting.
They also beat Georgia one year too in their season opener, so they have played well. And I think you're right. That's a very logical decision to put that there because they're also a flashy team.
Mm-hmm.
With the blue field.
Yeah.
The blue field. Yeah. See, that's an ad. It's something that makes them different. It makes them unique, and it makes people tune in. I definitely believe that it makes people tune in.
I can't.
I just want to be able to. I just want to be able to look at one of these.
It bothers my eyes. The blue
Yeah, it's
field
hard. It is
messes
kind of.
with me.
It is a lot different to watch on the blue field.
I don't like playing them in NCAA football. I don't. So the way to split the Pacific Coast Conference for the 7-team divisions is you do a coastal and mountain, and you protect some very important rivalries. But the coastal division would be Washington, Oregon, Oregon State, and then the California teams, so Stanford, Cal, USC, and UCLA. Washington and Washington State would be a part of the anchored rivalries in every conference, so that certain rivalries are still kept even though they're not in the same divisions. So the Mountain Division is Washington State, Boise State, BYU, Utah, Colorado, down to Arizona and Arizona State. The very important anchored rivalries, which let me know if you think there's any better than what I have here. We have Washington versus Washington State every year. Oregon, Boise State, which is already, they had a rivalry. You know, that was
Blunt punched a guy.
yeah, that was where LeGarrette Blunt punched a guy. So that was all I had in my head. Is that it has to be Oregon, Boise State. So Oregon State, BYU, Stanford against Utah, California, Colorado. Colorado was the one, you know, they don't really have a border possible rivalry in this divisional setup, but they're going to have some great divisional games against Utah and BYU. Then we have Arizona, USC, and Arizona State, UCLA, which you basically have, you know, the Tucson and Phoenix against SoCal.
I would flip Arizona State and Arizona. I would have Arizona State play USC and UCLA play Arizona.
So you want the blue to play blue and the red to play red?
Yeah.
I don't know. I guess I think of more of a. I think of it. I'm also trying to think of college basketball too, because I think, you know, even though they wouldn't have the anchored rivalries there, depending on the college basketball schedule, developing a rivalry between Arizona and UCLA as border states could work on a multiple sport level was one of the things that I also thought of. So what you can do for the venue of the new Pacific Coast, the Pac-14, if you want to so call it, I really like Mile High Stadium. I think that's a good place for a conference championship. Maybe it's just because I really like playing college championship games in NFL stadiums.
I think
What do you think?
that's a good idea, but I think we should do the suggestion that I had that it rotates because there's NFL teams that they can go to. They could go to Phoenix. They could go to Levi Stadium.
Levi Stadium would
They
be
could go
great.
to Vegas.
Right,
Well, they already
Vegas.
play in Levi Stadium now. And and then you could go to Mile High, and so like you can jump around with it.
Yeah, you know, maybe it's just I'm not a Big Ten guy. The Rose Bowl is so there's so much that's already done there. Why not put it somewhere, you know, constantly different? So the Pac-12 champion is not always playing in the Rose Bowl. So the Pac-12 champion would be playing in our rotating bowl system, possibly in an East Coast game, which I think would work because every team is going to have a traveling fan base in the system. What do you guys think?
I don't know, but isn't that the same situation that we talked about with the national championship, where you had two southeastern teams on the West Coast? I think might.
I think if it's flipped, it's
That
a
might be an
little
issue,
different
I think.
because I would say that as the more east you get, the more actually passionate people get about college football. Maybe there's more people on the eastern half of the United States that if it's in the new Atlanta Falcons stadium and it's USC and they're like, oh my God, I haven't seen a USC game since I was there in college before my career. USC fan, I've never seen them play. I think you have more of a chance of getting first-time national fan base people to these games. Maybe that just works for Notre Dame. You know?
I think that might be just an Oregon thing.
Well,
'cause
USC would be a good example. I'm sure they have a very large fan base outside of California.
But then there's also teams like, you know, in state, all three of us have different fan bases that we know travel better than some schools that are, you know, bigger than them.
Mhm.
Iowa State, and Nebraska all travel incredibly well for their bowl games, which they would to either coast for
all
one of
we
these
got.
games.
That's all we got.
Well,
is
yeah,
college
I
football.
mean,
Iowa-
Iowa goes to Florida. They go to
So
they
many
go to,
Iowa fans that I know
California,
went
so-
to the Rose Bowl.
Yeah, exactly,
you know?
and we go to Florida a lot for our bowl games. That's where a lot of our bowl games have been.
Outback Bowl.
Outback, Capital, the Orange Bowl, like
Mm-hmm.
Tampa, or another one. I can't remember the other one, but they went to Florida multiple times, and they always fill the stands. And
Right.
also at the Rose Bowl, which is in California, opposite coast. So that shows that they're willing to travel either direction.
Hey guys, thanks for listening to our in-depth analysis on how to restructure college football. If you want to hear all conferences, you can hear the other installments of this on the Loud Sports Podcast or the long form on the Loud Sports Podcast, or you can read it on my website at cornfedmedia.org.